The October evening air carried the crisp promise of autumn through the manicured gardens of the Whitmore estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Dr. Elena Vargas smoothed her navy dress as she walked beside her fiancé Michael toward the imposing colonial mansion. The golden windows glowed warmly against the darkening sky, but Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Remember, just be yourself," Michael whispered, squeezing her hand as they approached the front door. But his smile seemed strained, and Elena caught the nervous edge in his voice. The heavy oak door opened before they could knock, revealing a perfectly dressed woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon. Michael's mother, Catherine Whitmore, extended a manicured hand with a smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes. "Elena, dear," Catherine said, her voice carrying the refined cadence of old Connecticut money. "How lovely to finally meet you properly." Her gaze swept over Elena's appearance with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to judging people within seconds. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Whitmore," Elena replied, her slight accent wrapping around the English words like silk over steel. "Your home is beautiful." "Oh, please, call me Catherine," she said, though her tone suggested anything but warmth. "Come, everyone's gathered in the dining room. I do hope you'll find the conversation stimulating." The dining room was a testament to generational wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light over mahogany furniture that had likely graced the room for decades. Around the long table sat 8 members of the Whitmore family, their faces turning toward Elena with expressions of polite curiosity mixed with barely concealed judgment. Michael guided Elena to a seat halfway down the table, between his younger sister Jessica and his cousin Brian. The introductions blurred together. Aunts and uncles whose names carried the weight of New England social registers, cousins who worked in finance or law, all watching Elena with the kind of attention reserved for specimens under a microscope. "So, Elena," Jessica began, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon, "Michael tells us you're from Colombia?" "Yes, from Bogota originally," Elena confirmed, taking a sip of the excellent wine that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. "How fascinating," Brian interjected, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension he probably thought sounded worldly. "And you've been in the States for how long now?" "About 12 years. Elena replied evenly. "I came for graduate school and stayed." "Graduate school," Catherine repeated, as if the words were foreign. "At which institution?" "Harvard. I completed my doctorate in international relations there, then did postdoctoral work at Georgetown." A brief silence fell over the table, but Elena could see the subtle exchanges of glances, the slight raising of eyebrows that suggested her achievements were being mentally catalogued and, somehow, found wanting. "Well," Catherine said finally, "that's certainly ambitious of you." The word ambitious hung in the air like an accusation, and Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being underestimated, othered, reduced to her accent and appearance rather than her accomplishments. As the evening progressed, Elena found herself navigating an increasingly uncomfortable minefield of backhanded compliments and thinly veiled condescension. Every time she spoke, she noticed the way conversations seemed to pause, the way eyes flickered toward each other across the table, holding back what she suspected were smirks. The weather outside had turned colder, and Elena could hear the wind picking up through the tall windows. But the chill she felt had nothing to do with the October night, and everything to do with the growing realization that she was being judged not for who she was, but for who they assumed her to be. Chapter 2. The Moment of Truth. The main course had been cleared, and the conversation had drifted to politics and current events, territory that Elena knew better than anyone at the table, though they seemed blissfully unaware of this fact. She listened as Brian pontificated about foreign policy, with the confidence of someone who had never set foot outside the United States, except for European vacations. "The problem with these developing nations," he declared, gesturing with his wine glass, "is that they simply don't understand the complexities of international diplomacy. They lack the educational infrastructure, you know?" Elena's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her water glass. Across the table, Michael shifted uncomfortably, finally seeming to notice the undercurrent of condescension that had been building all evening. "Actually," Elena began carefully, "many Latin American universities have excellent—" "Oh, I'm sure they do their best," Jessica interrupted with a patronizing smile. "But let's be realistic about the differences in standards, shall we?" The lump in Elena's throat grew larger, but she maintained her composure. "Education is universal in its pursuit of excellence, I believe. Harvard has many professors from—" "Your accent is adorable." Brian cut her off, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of everyone at the table. The conversations around them died as all eyes turned toward Elena. Do you even understand all the big words we're using? The question hung in the air like a slap. Elena felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the effort of containing her anger. Around the table, she could see the poorly concealed amusement on several faces. Catherine's lips were pressed together in what might have been disapproval, but whether at Brian's rudeness or Elena's presence was unclear. Laughter rippled down the table. Soft, polite laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Elena forced a smile, swallowing the response that burned in her throat. She had faced this kind of prejudice before, in conference rooms and lecture halls, from people who heard her accent and immediately assumed she was less intelligent, less capable, less worthy of respect. "I do my best," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Michael finally found his voice. "Brian, that's enough," he said, but his protest lacked conviction, and Elena noticed he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Oh, come on, Michael," Brian continued, emboldened by the attention. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've always been one to help people. Remember that scholarship kid you befriended in prep school? You have such a good heart." The implication was clear. Elena was charity, a project, someone Michael was trying to upgrade or save. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the gentle clink of crystal and silver as people shifted nervously in their seats. Elena looked around the table, seeing them all clearly for the first time. Their comfortable assumptions, their inherited privilege, their complete inability to imagine that the woman sitting among them might possess knowledge, achievements, and influence that dwarfed their own. They saw her accent and her brown skin and filled in the rest with their prejudices, never bothering to ask, never thinking to wonder. The storm outside seemed to intensify, rain beginning to patter against the tall windows. Elena felt as isolated as if she were standing alone in that storm, surrounded by people who had already decided who she was without bothering to learn anything about her. But something inside her was shifting. The hurt was still there, but underneath it, a quiet strength was building. She thought of all the times she had been underestimated, all the times she had proved those assumptions wrong. She thought of the speeches she had given, the policies she had helped shape, the respect she had earned in rooms far more important than this one. She was Dr. Elena Vargas, and these people had no idea who they were talking to. Chapter 3. The ambassador arrives. Just as the dessert course was being served, a delicate crème brûlée that Elena barely touched, a commotion arose from the front of the house. The family's butler, James, appeared in the doorway of the dining room, his usually impeccable composure slightly ruffled. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "I apologize for the interruption, but there's been a development." Catherine looked annoyed at the breach of protocol. "James, surely this can wait until after dinner." "I'm afraid not, madam. The ambassador has arrived." The words sent a ripple of confusion around the table. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "The ambassador?" Catherine repeated, clearly flustered. "What ambassador? We weren't expecting any." "Ambassador Rodriguez, madam, from the Colombian embassy in Washington. He says he had a prior commitment in the area and hoped to pay his respects to Dr. Vargas while she was here." The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Elena could feel every eye at the table turning toward her, confusion written across their faces. Brian's wineglass paused halfway to his lips. "Dr. Vargas?" Jessica whispered, the pieces beginning to fall into place. Before anyone could respond, a tall, distinguished man appeared in the doorway behind James. Ambassador Carlos Rodriguez was in his early 60s, with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to moving in the highest circles of international diplomacy. His tailored suit and confident demeanor commanded immediate attention, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. He scanned the table until his eyes found Elena, and his face broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Dr. Vargas," he said, striding directly toward her with obvious pleasure. "It's been far too long. I was in New York for the Security Council meetings and heard through diplomatic channels that you were in the area. I simply couldn't pass up the opportunity to see you." Elena rose from her chair, her composure returning like armor, settling into place. "Ambassador Rodriguez," she replied, her accent now carrying authority rather than vulnerability. "What a wonderful surprise. How are Maria and the children?" "Thriving, thanks to you. Maria still talks about the education reform proposals you helped draft. They've made such a difference in the rural provinces." The family around the table sat frozen, their minds struggling to process what they were witnessing. The woman they had been mocking, the woman they had dismissed as some sort of charity case, was being treated with obvious respect and familiarity by a high-ranking diplomat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ambassador Rodriguez said, turning to address the room with practiced diplomatic grace. I do hope you realize what a privilege it is to dine with Dr. Vargas. Her work with the UN Commission on Cultural Relations has been instrumental in shaping policy throughout Latin America. The conferences haven't been the same without her keynote speeches. Catherine's face had gone pale, and Elena could see the rapid calculations happening behind her eyes. Brian looked as though he might choke on his wine. Dr. Vargas, the ambassador continued, I was hoping to discuss the upcoming Geneva summit with you, if you have time. The Secretary General specifically mentioned that your input would be invaluable for the Cultural Preservation Initiative. Elena felt a calmness settle over her, the kind of peace that comes from being truly seen and valued. Of course, Ambassador. I'd be happy to discuss it. She looked around the table, taking in the stunned faces, the dropped jaws, the dawning realization of just how badly they had misjudged her. Michael was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it pride, shock, embarrassment at his family's behavior? The storm outside had intensified, but Elena no longer felt cold. The wind howled around the mansion, but inside, she felt perfectly calm. Because the accent they had mocked, the background they had dismissed, the assumptions they had made, all of it had led them to completely misunderstand who she was and what she had accomplished. Ambassador Rodriguez graciously accepted Catherine's flustered invitation to join them for coffee, settling into the chair that James quickly provided. The dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and Elena watched with quiet satisfaction as the family struggled to recalibrate their understanding of the evening. Dr. Vargas and I first met at the Inter-American Development Bank Symposium in 2018, the ambassador explained, accepting a cup of coffee from the still-stunned butler. She was presenting her research on economic integration in post-conflict societies. Brilliant work, really. It's been cited in policy papers throughout the Americas. Jessica cleared her throat nervously. I had no idea Elena was so accomplished in international affairs. Oh yes, Ambassador Rodriguez continued, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents in the room. Dr. Vargas is one of our most respected voices in cultural diplomacy. Her doctoral dissertation on migration patterns and economic development is required reading at several diplomatic academies. Elena sipped her coffee, allowing the silence to stretch. She could feel the weight of their stares, could practically hear the mental recalculations happening around the table. These people who had spent the evening treating her like an outsider, like someone to be pitied or dismissed, were slowly understanding the magnitude of their error. Brian, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the ambassador's arrival, finally found his voice. So you work with the UN? I serve as a special advisor on cultural preservation and educational initiatives in Latin America, Elena replied evenly. It's work I'm passionate about, ensuring that developing nations have a voice in international policy discussions. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. This woman, whom they had assumed lacked education and sophistication, was literally helping to shape international policy. The accent you were asking about earlier, Elena continued, her voice calm but pointed, comes from growing up in Bogota, where I learned 4 languages by the time I was 16. Spanish, English, French, and Portuguese. It's proven quite useful in my diplomatic work. Catherine's cup rattled slightly against its saucer as she set it down. We had no idea of your accomplishments, dear. Michael never mentioned. I asked him not to. Elena interrupted gently. I wanted to meet you all as simply Elena, not as Dr. Vargas. I wanted to see who you were when you thought I was just someone with an adorable accent who might not understand big words. The comment landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort around the table. Brian's face had turned an interesting shade of red.